All right, good afternoon. It's noon on Wednesday, so it's time for an Iowa Learning Farms conservation webinar. Welcome to our second webinar of 2025. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and faculty affiliate with Iowa Learning Farms. Excited to be able to moderate a webinar again today. And today we have with us Alex Schaffer. Alex is a senior research agronomist with the Iowa Soybean Association. Gotten to know Alex through a relay intercropping project that we have with Iowa Learning Farms, and find Alex super knowledgeable about these topics. So I'm really excited for his presentation today, and really we are very fortunate to have the partnership with the Iowa Soybean Association that we do through the Iowa Learning Farms and many other efforts at Iowa State University, but at least for today, Iowa Learning Farms. So today, Alex is going to talk to us about 2024 relay cropping management and results. As always, if you have questions for Alex, please type those into the chat box and we'll get those to Alex at the end of the talk. So with that, Alex, the virtual floor is all yours.
Appreciate it, Matt. Thank you for the introduction. Really appreciate everybody tuning in today. I hope it's informative and everybody learns a little something, and also it should be very entertaining. I've got a lot of pictures, and it's fun for us really to share some of the work that our farmers do and have done over the past year, and the work that myself and my colleagues have done to kind of learn more about this practice. So with that, I'll get right into it. In the relay crop trials that we conducted the past year. So just a little bit of an agenda. What I'm going to talk about is our 2024 relay trials. And so we've got a number of trials in partnership with Iowa Learning Farms. Iowa Learning Farms won a conservation innovation grant. So I'll go through some of those sites, as well as some Iowa soybean sites that we've kind of done on the side. One in particular, a farmer relay cropping with wheat as a small grain. And then finally, key management factors. I think that's probably what a lot of people are here for, is how do we do this successfully? So getting into some background for the uninitiated, what is relay intercropping? So relay intercropping, it's when you plant an overwintering cereal grain in the fall, followed by soybeans in the spring. The cereal grain is harvested in early July, leaving the soybeans to complete their life cycle and be harvested in the fall as a second crop in the same year. So what is a conservation innovation grant? A USDA SIG is, and this comes from their website, through creative problem solving and innovation, SIG partners work to address our nation's water quality, air quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat challenges, all while improving agricultural operations. So Iowa Learning Farms is the winner of this SIG, and Iowa Soybean is a partner helping to implement some of the on-farm trials that we're doing as part of the grant. And then finally, about the Iowa Soybean Association Research Center for Farming Innovation. So RCFI, we do on-farm research trialing, products and practices mostly, and field length replicated strips. And it's important, I guess, to note that most of our results are summarized by yield from the Combine Monitor. And there's a group of 5 agronomists and 3 analysts that really work through a lot of these trials through the season. And RCFI also has a third area of work, which is our distributed conservation agronomists out across the state working in ag retail. And they're more helping farmers to implement some of the practices like what we'll talk about today. So as we get into it, we've got trials with soybeans, rye, and wheat. And, this slide is about why are we interested in relay cropping? So the main deal, the cereal grain planted in the fall that overwinters, it offers all the same benefits of a cover crop. So relay intercropping is a chance to combine some economic gains with the conservation practice, which I think is something that everybody's interested in. And you'll see on my slide, I've got some environmental benefits and farm benefits, and I think it's important to call out that the two are not mutually exclusive, and things that benefit the environment usually also benefit the farm when it comes to soil health and erosion prevention and those types of things. And finally, on this slide, I wanted to highlight these two pictures and why I have them on this slide. It kind of tells a little bit of a story. My first year, 2022, at the Soybean Association, previous employee, my friend Theo, took me on a field visit to show me what relay intercropping was all about. And so we got up to Northeast Iowa, and as we arrived, there's a very heavy rainstorm. We waited it out in the truck, and we were at this field here on the left. And believe it or not, I was able to walk across the 120 feet of headlands to get into the plot to snap this photo. And when I got back into the truck, I didn't have to clean my boots. And then as we were leaving the farm, this isn't more than a mile away from that field. And of course, there's a lot of water runoff into the ditch. I'm sure there's some landscape properties as well that lead to this, but the first place my head went is water infiltration between the two fields. And if this overwintering small grain can really help this much get water into the soil, there's something good going on. So moving on to continue talking about why at Iowa Soybean we're interested in this practice, because we've seen it fail, quite a bit. There's been some poor results, and I guess to back up, I'll explain my graph. The yellow bars in the back are sole crop soybean yields with bushels produced at the top of the bar. And the blue bars in the front are the relay crop soybean yields and the percentage. So the blue bar and the paired yellow bar would be in a replicated strip trial. And the percentage is the percent of sole crop or relay crop soybean yield as compared to the sole crop soybean bushels. So you can see there's some not very good, 10s, 15s, 20, 30% yields. But you also see we have seen some success in this practice. And, it's that overlap in chance for profitability as well as conservation benefits, and the fact that it's done with soybeans is really why we're interested. And the other trend from this graph, so this includes all of the relay crop versus sole crop soybean trials that we've done since 2020, and there's a trend. So along the bottom, the N, the C, and the S denotes north, central, and south. And you can see it seems like geography does play some role in the success of this practice and what we've seen across the state. So moving on, this map, it shows all of the relay crop trial locations that Iowa Soybean has collected data on for the year. Everything shown here is relay crop soybeans versus sole crop soybeans and in replicated strips. And all the locations are done with cereal rye except for this one in Northwest Iowa that's been done with wheat. So what I'm going to do is highlight the results of these 4 trials as part of this presentation. So we'll jump right into it. Elma, Iowa. If you know, this is about a stone's throw from Minnesota. And what I'm showing here is some of the management data, and all these 4 locations, the format of the slides will be the same. And so I've listed what I feel like is some important management data here on the left-hand side, and then we'll go through a bunch of scouting photos from the fields. But again, Elma is not far from Minnesota. It's far north. This farmer, he did all the things that we kind of recommend when it comes to relay intercropping, which is get your rye or your cereal grain seeded early in the fall, get your soybeans seeded early in the spring, get your rye off in a reasonable amount of time in the beginning of July, so on and so forth. But you'll see as we get into our results, maybe this farmer is probably wondering what I was telling him, I guess, because they didn't turn out so well. But the first thing you'll notice is an extremely thick matta cover here. And keep in mind, so this was seeded in the fall of 2023, before a pretty mild winter of 2023 and 2024. So this farmer, he's probably not used to having near the establishment success or biomass growth that far north in the state, with a typical winter. And you can see, we're talking 10, 11, 12 inches of biomass. And at this point, the beans are already planted and they've got a lot of biomass to deal with to get up and get some daylight. So this is a picture a little bit later, probably getting into June at some point, and the beans are, you can see maybe there's a little bit of disease and they're pretty spindly, not much going on there. And then this is the sole crop side where, so these, I should back up, most of these trials were full width cereal rye seeded in the fall, and then we establish our strips by terminating the sole crop soybean cover crop. And here you can see it's a lot of biomass for those beans to get through. And I think, you might notice in some of the yield results where that may have been a factor. But again, very mild winter, a lot of tillering, and a lot of biomass come the spring. So again, here the beans, this is getting closer to harvest time. You can see we've got heads. We're probably the end of June or so. And these are the sole crop beans. They look a lot better. The first thing I notice from this photo is the residue here has really melted down and basically disappeared. But again, they had a lot to come up through, and I think they were set back a little bit from it. So this photo is, again, the sole crop soybeans after the rye has been taken off. And you can kind of see to the right and left, that stubble left behind. In general, I think these beans look really good. Not much different than a sole crop system, conventionally farmed. And now these are the beans where the rye was harvested, and you can tell they look pretty poor. So they don't have great color, just not a ton of growth above the straw. I think these beans were basically about shut down by the time the rye was harvested, which you can tell it wasn't late. This is very important, getting the small grain harvested as early as is reasonable, just to open up and let these soybeans kind of do their thing. Again, just another angle. You can see what I'm looking for here. In a really good soybean crop, you would see these beans growing up and above the cut straw, and they'd have a little bit better color. And we want some vegetative growth after the small grain's been taken off to maximize yield, and I don't see a lot of that happening in this situation. So now we'll get into some of the yield and profitability results of the two systems. And again, the next 4 locations that I'm going to show, these slides are all kind of formatted the same, where we'll go through bushels produced and kind of value those bushels in different ways, depending on how a farmer might deal with that commodity. So my first takeaway, and I'll explain this graph a little bit. We've got the average of the location over here on the left, and then all the replications to the right. And the blue bars are soybean bushels produced, and the yellow bars is the bushels of cereal rye, in this case produced, or bushels of grain essentially. And of course, relay crop strips versus sole crop strips. So like I said, the soybean production at this field was not good at all. And overall bushels, the farmer, he was better off with his sole crop soybeans. The other thing I was talking about in one of the photos, the sole crop beans, I think that amount of biomass early did have an effect in that we're averaging, probably just under 60 bushel beans, and he could probably do a little bit better. But in general, these beans are it could probably be called a failure, but there are some things that we've learned from that, and I think probably the biggest thing is the thick seeding of the rye. Otherwise, like I said, planting and harvest on track. Rye yields are okay, and we'll talk about variety selection and rye management as I move forward too. So the next graphic I'll be showing with all these locations is the estimated gross grain market value with the rye grain marketed as a grain, so 520 a bushel is the market price we use to come up with these bars. And again, you can see sole crop soybeans with the rye marketed as grain, sole crop beans would have still been more profitable. So finally, the third way that we decided to think about valuing this extra commodity produced is estimated a gross clean cover crop seed. So say a farmer they're gonna plant it back on their own acres, or they're gonna sell it to a neighbor or a local cover crop seed dealer. We're valuing this at about $12 a bushel, and that would account for about $1 a bushel cleaning fee as well. So I guess kind of heard around $13 or $14 for a bushel of clean cover crop seed. So we take $1 out of that, brings it down to $12 a bushel. And still here you can see it's a little bit more competitive, but with the poor soybean yields in relay, the sole crop soybeans still seem to be the better choice, at least this far north. And like I said, I think geography really plays a factor in this situation. And that thick seeding of rye, he was 2 bushel. And the stuff really grew over the mild winter. So things to keep in mind. Now we'll move over just a little bit to Northwood, still in the far north of the state. But management's a little bit different. Mainly, the seeding rate is down to 75 pounds versus 100 pounds or more at Elma. And then also he selected Hazlitt rye here. So back to Elma, that was a variety not stated. And these farmers chose a stated variety that is Hazlitt, and I think we'll see that reflected in some of the yield results. The other thing, Elmo was a little bit more bare bones. He didn't do much on the small grains as far as pest control, but at Northwood they did apply a fungicide and insecticide, and I don't see a ton of yield boost. Of course, protecting the flag leaf is important, but I think really where fungicide becomes important is if we're thinking about planting this harvested cereal grain back as a cover crop the next year. So we'll get into some pictures here, and I got to call out Gentry Sorensen. I swiped a lot of these photos from him. Appreciate it, Gentry. This was his site to manage as part of the SIG, but we also collected some data on it this year. So the first thing I notice, and thinking about Elma compared to here, and again, geographically very close, the rye doesn't seem to be as thick here, and I want to say that seeding rate plays an effect there. And then just another picture as the rye is growing up. Not a ton to see here, but this photo, you can see the beans. They don't look great. They do come around, as we'll see in the yield, but what's next door, this is the first thing that catches my eye. It's not a corn crop. That is their Hazlitt cereal rye, that it just gets extremely tall, and that's a known factor. So it's important that we have rye tall enough to harvest all the grain above the soybeans without doing too much clipping or damage to the top of the soybeans. But also we don't want rye falling down or, intercepting more light from the soybeans because it's a taller variety or whatever the case may be. So I think variety selection is pretty important. And here's just another photo of, it's 5 foot tall rye out there. I've heard from Gentry it was a real bear to walk through to collect some of his notes. So, and here's the soybean plants in there. They got very leggy and spindly in this situation. It's it's a known effect of relaying, but as I'll show in one of the last locations, I think there's some management to work around kind of this result. And again, so I didn't label these pictures because you can tell from the stem, but these are the sole crop soybeans. There's a lot of biomass there, nodes, pods, look all right. And then here's the relay crop soybeans. And the first thing I notice is the difference in this stem compared to that last picture. Biomass, I think, is still good. There's still, fair amount of pods, looking better than the Elma location. But again, this far north is pretty tough. Again, here's the soybeans after the rye has been harvested, and they look a little bit better. I think the color's better. I still don't see a ton of growth popping up above the cut straw. But they look just a little bit better to me. And again, another photo showing the sole crop soybeans with the relayed soybeans. Now, as we get into some results, again, pretty poor soybean yields, but the rye yields are better. Again, planting and harvest dates are on track, kind of what we recommend. Early planting, early April, early July harvest of the small grain is pretty important. Then I attribute most of these rye yields to the variety selection. So you'll see, overall bushel production, they did better in relay crop. Now, still their soybean yields aren't great. But with, beans are $10 right now and cover crop seed can have some value. I think these farmers are somewhat satisfied with the result of their trial. And again, so this graph showing return with our rye grain valued at $5.20 a bushel and our $10 beans. In that situation, still taking a loss. So it's important for this farmer to market this grain as seed, cover crop seed to a neighbor or himself or customers or whatever the case may be. And if that's the case, you can see relay crop due to those pretty good rye yields. Relay crop pencils out a little bit better than sole crop soybeans in this situation. So now we'll move into the southern part of the state down to Oskaloosa. The first thing I guess I'd call out here is that the rye was seeded quite a bit later at this location. Just logistics got in the way, and it was mid to late October when it happened. Still pretty heavy, variety not stated, 7.5-inch rows. These guys did do nitrogen and fungicide. So I think that's important to note. Some take more of a bare bones approach, and these guys chose to take it along a little bit further. So I'll get into some photos again, just a little bit thinner here, and I attribute some of that to this later planting date. Maybe some less tillering going on, or the residue may have played a factor here. And as we get into the beans, they're a lot more compact, and in general, I think they look a little bit better. They're getting more daylight, more airflow. And again, before the rye harvest, these beans, I think they look pretty good. Come in and harvest these heads and see what you've got left after. And so let's see if I can get this thing to play. Maybe not. I have a video here that shows my friend Gene harvesting with the 1660, and I'm not sure why it doesn't want to play, but it doesn't. So anyways, I was just going to show as he cuts the small grain off here, you can see the beans kind of popping up under the grain head. And the other thing I was going to point out, even with these kind of medium-sized older flotation tires, if he can get down between the row, he does pretty good about preserving his beans. And I've seen one farmer in particular, they run a combine with twin duals that they can straddle this soybean row, and then the only beans that they run over, or the only thing they run over is on the headlands when they're turning around, and that seems to work pretty well. So this truck bed picture, left is sole crop, right is relay crop. You can see yields down a little bit, but we're not in terrible shape. So as we get into results, bushels produced, we're about breaking even between the two systems. But if you look at the soybean yields, 49, 50 bushel yields in relay, that's pretty good. I think variety selection on the rye side here, maybe we could see those bushels increased and overall more productivity on the acre. The other thing I'd call out is there's a little bit of a landscape field effect going on with this trial. You see these soybeans are down on yield a little bit. So thinking about this as grain, so 520 a bushel, we're making a little bit of money, but when you consider the nitrogen and fungicide, it's probably maybe a little closer to a break even. But then again, as cover crop, which is what these farmers will do, they're doing pretty good. And what they like about this, what they tell me, is they're able to produce their own cover crop seed without taking acres out of corn and soybean production. So, and then finally, up to far northwest Iowa near Lamar's, keep in mind we're considerably north of Highway 20 here. And there's some special management that happens with this location. So you can see this farmer has implemented a skip row or row indexing type planting fashion with his cereal grain, and it really gives the soybeans a lot more breathing room. So what he's done, he uses a 20-inch planter, and this is wheat also. So he uses a 20-inch planter for his wheat. He plugs every third row, leaving a 20-inch gap, and then he comes in and plants the soybeans with the same planter, and he offsets that row about 10 inches. So from the last wheat row to the first bean row, there's about a 5-inch gap, 2 bean rows with 20 inches in between. And then again, another 5-inch gap before the twin wheat rows. And what you can see as we get into some of these photos, the main thing called out to me is that the beans in relay, they don't look a lot different than the beans in the sole crop strips. And, the only thing better here would be if this guy had a 30-inch planter and he could run one row down the middle. But, that comes down to logistics and kind of what he's got on the farm to make work. So again, the beans, and this photo is a little cherry picked, but you can see there's a lot of daylight making it down through the canopy into those bean rows. And I think that really helps. This is another video that I won't be able to play. I'm not sure what happened with those, but it's my drone shot as I kind of move across and scout the field. So moving on to the results, this row indexing, I think there's a lot to it. And you look at these soybean yields up around 50 bushel and his wheat yields in the 60s or close to 60. I think that's a really successful trial. And this engineered approach, I think there's a lot to it. The other thing that's important to call out is these farmers, they do plant an earlier corn hybrid. So they can get it off and get their wheat planted in a timely fashion. So, in the budgeting return on investment, you probably need to look at this system in a 2-year rotation so you can understand what you're losing in corn yield to accommodate this type of an approach. So again, gross grain market value with the wheat valued at 540 a bushel. We're making just a little bit of money here. And I believe these guys are pretty bare bones as far as fungicide, nitrogen fertilizer. So they're not in it a ton more than, what they would be with a cover crop. And then if you think about this as clean cover crop seed at $12 a bushel, that's pretty attractive. So key management takeaways. So part of the Conservation Innovation Grant includes some small plot work done by Iowa State on their research farms. So I need to thank Mark Licht for sharing some of this data with me. And also keep in mind, this is coming from 1 year of small plot trials done in 2024 after the very mild winter that I spoke about. So that could impact some of the small grain recommendations that some of the data is kind of leading us towards. So again, preliminary work shows you may be able to cut small grain seeding rate if you get it seeded in the first half of October. So ISU did 25, 50, and 75-pound seeding rates of the small grain, and they didn't see a yield loss from that small grain. If the small grain was planted like before the 15th of October. Variety selection, important for rye yield. So we saw that comparing Elma with Northwood. Iowa soybean has also done some work with hybrid rye in the past, works really well. You just have to be careful with plant variety protection laws and, make sure you're not planting back and harvesting something that isn't totally legal. Fungicide and fertilizer can be very helpful, especially following corn crop where scab might be a concern, but always abide by IPM best management practices, especially scouting, paying attention to the weather and knowing what kind of pressure you have before making an application. We do recommend 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen for the small grain. The main thing here would be to not over fertilize because you worry about the small grain lodging. Skip row planting on the small grain side, I think that's one of the biggest keys to the system. Just if it's plug in a row in the air seeder or, just using a planter and like Lamar's 2 out of the 3 rows are planting or whatever you can do to make a place to plant some soybeans and give them some room to grow seems to be helpful. Soybean management, as with conventional beans, longer maturing beans seem to yield better and may be amplified in this system. Again, preliminary work from ISU shows a seeding rate greater than 120,000 may be beneficial, maybe even closer to 150. We think about planting more soybean plants because each one of those plants is going to be under more stress. It's going to produce less seeds. So if we can offset that with a higher population, but more work needs to be done in this area. Then early planting of soybeans is key. So really we're avoiding damage to the small grain as well as getting the beans out and growing before the rye is too competitive. And finally, something that, really interesting, if you can't row index, like if you're spreading cereal rye and VTing it in the fall, maybe you come in and strip till before you plant those soybeans. I think just anything to give them a little more room. So my final thoughts here as we move through, a nod to the late great Jerry Springer there, but since 2020, Iowa Soybean Association has implemented 36 relay intercropping trials. And what we've learned is it requires some pretty specific management. Everything I called out in the previous slide is important. Iowa State work kind of supports the same theories that we've developed from doing, on-farm trials since 2020. If you think back to slide 4 or 5, geography, I think definitely plays a role, and you can mitigate some of that, I think, with some of this management, as we saw at Lamar's, pretty far north and still a good result, but geography, growing season length definitely plays a role. Again, variety is important. We saw comparing Northwood site to Elma when thinking about that small grain variety. Market expansion for the small grain, I think, is crucial for adoption of this practice. So you can see with the data that I showed that the system's most profitable marketing that small grain as a cover crop seed, but it wouldn't be too far off. Like if a lot of farmers are relay intercropping, all of our cover crop needs are going to be satisfied pretty quickly. So I think, if there was a way to get some wheat into a pig ration or, some some box cars on train tracks across the state. There just needs to be some sort of a marketplace in the state of Iowa for the small grain if this is going to be a thing that takes off. Yeah, and finally in 2025, a sneak preview, this picture on the right, some wheat seedlings that were planted this fall. We've got 5 locations out there that we're looking forward to see how well it works across the state with wheat instead of just one. So stay tuned for that. And finally, my acknowledgement. So couldn't do it without Iowa soybean farmers. Some of this work is supported by the checkoff. All of the data I just showed was generated by our soybean farmers. So it's important, we couldn't do any of this without them. Of course, Iowa Learning Farms, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it. And especially Mark Licht and Liz Ripley and Gentry Sorensen for sharing some data and photos. The NRCS for the funding, and then as well Iowa State University. And with that, I think Matt will finish up a few things and get me some questions.
Yep. Thanks, Alex. That was really interesting and loved all the pictures, really useful. So I'll go through those logistical slides. If you watch this webinar live and want to earn a CCA CEU, please email Alena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, Alena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Let's go on to the next slide. Should be all right. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. Only one survey is needed for 2025 webinars. So if you were on last week and filled one out, thank you. If this is your first webinar of 2025 and you're willing to fill out this voluntary demographic survey, we would greatly appreciate it. You can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey or scan the QR code. And I think next slide. Oh, all right. We got Andrew Rust that's with the Nature Conservancy, that's a freshwater restoration specialist, will be talking about Iowa's oxbows reborn, bringing life back to one of Iowa's vital ecosystems. So please tune in next week for Andrew talking about oxbows. And I think then the last one is a plug that all the Iowa Learning Farms webinars are on archived on the Learning Farms website, or you can go to the YouTube channel, the Iowa Learning Farms webinars YouTube channel for that as well. Okay, and if you tuned in yesterday, if you missed yesterday's webinar but are interested in perennial ground cover, please tune into the Regen PGC webinar series, January 4th, 21st, 28th, and then February 4th and 11th, talking about that. So Dr. Raj Raman and Dr. Dan Anderson heavily involved with that project, and they have a 5-part webinar series. So please tune into that. And I think then I am done with my comments. So let's get to some of these questions. The first one, what's the benefit of relay cropping versus double cropping?
Yeah, so I think I would be very interested in comparing the two in the same field. I'll start with that, but I think there's a swath through the middle of Iowa. This is one of the questions we have, is maybe where this line falls, but I'm not sure you could pull off double cropping. Essentially, the advantage is getting the beans a head start before July and getting them up out of the ground. And then as soon as that rye or wheat comes off, the beans are there. But, I think relay intercropping may be beneficial, like very localized in a swath through the Midwest where double cropping isn't quite possible. So that's, just getting the beans ahead.
Yeah, and I guess that somebody asked about the straw from the wheat or the rye, but with relay intercropping, we were really not able to harvest that. With the double cropping, you might be able to harvest that wheat
Yep.
or that straw.
Yep.
Okay. I guess this one, I think you kind of talked about this at the end, but how many elevators accept rye grain in Iowa, or does the grain stay on the farm for use as an animal
Yeah.
feed?
Yeah. So most of it, I believe, does stay on the farm more for cover crop seed or, at least in the local community. The outlets for the small grain, I think, are mostly on the borders of the state near the rivers. And yeah, so there's not much. That's something that would need to be improved upon if this is really adopted on a large scale.
Okay.
So
All right. How tall was the rye at harvest at the Elma site?
that's a good question. It would have been shorter than Northwood, but at least 4 foot tall, between
Okay.
4 and 5, I would say.
Okay. How much longer maturity would you recommend for the soybean versus maybe where it's used as a sole crop system?
Yeah. So this is kind of hard to answer. We would say as long as you can tolerate before a frost, but if I had to give a rule of thumb, it would be at least a half maturity group longer than what you would normally plant. But then really as we get closer to that 4.0 maturity, like I think Oskaloosa was 3.9, something like that. Seemed to do better. Now Lamar's, those were a 2.5 maturity bean, and that turned out pretty well for him. So again, it's a combination of management, but at least a half maturity group longer, I would say.
Okay. Um, Here's one. Why did you refer to the small grain crop as a cover crop?
Uh, is that question from Mark Licht?
No,
Uh,
no.
it's not a cover crop.
Okay.
It's a cash crop at that
Yeah.
point.
Okay.
I guess the point I'm trying to make with that is that, the benefits of an overwintering cereal grain apply the same as they would with a cover crop as this cash crop.
Okay. Um, so we probably have time for a couple more questions if anybody has one, but get this one in there. Has anyone used strip till for the soybeans? I guess for spacing soybeans from the small grain, and did it damage the rye yield?
Yeah, I haven't been around it, but I think it's a very viable option. No different. To me, the biggest downside is you're probably wasting a little bit of seed in the fall
Okay.
and planting something that you're going to rip up. But yeah, at the same time, if you can pull it off in the spring, I think that's a great option. And I would expect some yield loss from full width rye if you didn't produce soybeans, for instance. But yeah, just trade-offs to really try and optimize both crops.
There was, yeah, this one I appreciate the person asking this one again, but were you able to change any of the herbicide program where you had the relay cropped soybeans?
So, not exactly, I wouldn't say.
Okay.
So, in most of the trials that I've done, there's been some sort of a herbicide application after the small grain has come
Okay.
off to control some water hemp and things that are down in there. So, to me, it would have to be a really, really clean field for just like narrow row soybeans. You would have to start very clean with a very low seed bank to be able to totally eliminate a herbicide pass in this system.
Okay. Oh, I like this one. This person's getting at something I thought about too. Would relay cropping work better on irrigated areas since the rye or the wheat wouldn't rob moisture from the soybeans?
I'm dying to get trials under a
Okay.
pivot. Yep,
All right.
for sure. Yep.
All right, Alex, we need to talk about that because maybe we can do that on some of the drainage water recycling sites
Yep.
as they get
I've
built.
got I've got one
Yeah.
particular farm in
Okay.
mind as soon as it goes to beans. Yep.
Okay. All right. All right. Um, do you have any results on corn yield following that intercrop versus straight soybeans?
We haven't looked at that. Yeah,
Okay.
we should, but no, we haven't looked at the subsequent year after relay. No.
Okay. I guess one of the and we are doing some of this work at Gilmore City as well. We'll be going back to the same plots year after year where we do the relay intercropping with beans and then the corn yield. So hopefully we'll have some results to share from there in future years as well. Okay, here was one. Would cost share be available for the rye, and is that taken account in the revenue?
So I'm not super up to speed on cost shares, but I would assume not because it's a cash crop at that point. And what was the second part of the question?
No, I think that was it. So yeah, because
Okay.
you didn't take that you didn't
Oh,
take that into account in your
no,
revenue. No.
no, we
Yep.
didn't. The
Yep.
only thing, yeah, it would have just been bushels by price and that clean cover crop seed we did take $1 out of that value just for the cost to clean in the seed is kind of how we thought about it.
Okay. Um, do you think there's chance of successful relay cropping north of Iowa?
Uh, maybe I
Okay.
don't know. I'm skeptical. I think, if you were going to do it, that row indexing, just given the beans a little bit more of a chance would be really important, and then the growing season, But from what we've seen, and again back to slide 4 or 5, the north, we've seen a lot lower success rate even in northern Iowa. So.
Okay. Um, I guess was 2024 uh, kind of a tough year for, I guess, the soybean side of it.
I mean, it was very dry in September, August, September, October. So I think yes, but like Lamar's, they caught some rains uh, at a good time to feed the soybeans. And in general, if I have to paint with a broad brush, I'm going to say yes. Soybeans in general were thirsty in the end of the
Yeah.
season, but
That that's certainly kind of what we saw at our Gilmore City site. We hardly got any rain in July and August after we harvested that rye.
yeah.
Um, well, thank you so much, Alex. This is really useful, important information, and I hope that we can kind of plan, almost like plug you in a year from now to talk about the 2025 results and compare and contrast to 2024. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm going to put you on the spot and say, hopefully that you commit to doing one again next year.
let's do it. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. All right. That's awesome. So again, if folks need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. With that, again, all these are archived on the Iowa Learning Farms website or on our YouTube channel. So please go and take a look at those. And Alex, any parting comments?
Nope, just again, thanks to the farmers that helped,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the partnership with them and Iowa Learning Farms and yeah, everybody involved in the project.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I want to echo that about uh, the farmers that were willing to try this. We really appreciate and value their what they've done so much. So with that, please tune in next week to hear about Oxbows and be on the lookout for other webinars coming up. With that, have a great rest of your day.